Hello and welcome to yet another tutorial by Davies Media Design. My name is Michael Davies, and in today's tutorial I'll be showing you how to easily design a professional logo using GIMP. This is GIMP version 2.10.10, which at the time of this tutorial is the latest version of GIMP. But of course, before we get into that, I want to direct you guys over to my website at daviesmediadesign.com. As always, we have tons of GIMP video tutorials and GIMP how-to articles on here. You can also enroll in my GIMP 2.10 Masterclass from beginner to pro photo editing on Udemy. And you can enroll in any of my Skillshare classes by visiting gimpschool.com. And I'll include a link to this as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. So here is my final logo design. Here you can see I did a circular design and I have some mountains in the background as well as this sun here with a long shadow. And then I have some text. So this is a fairly complex logo design, although it is easy to create and it looks pretty professional. If I come over here, I can hide my light blue background and show my white background. So you guys can see that you can have whatever background color you want on here, or you can have no background, so you can have a completely transparent background. And this allows you to transfer your logo onto things like apparel, t-shirts, maybe products that you want to print your logo on, or you just want to add this to your website. So pretty much anywhere you want to put this logo, you can add it, and you can add it without a background. So let's dive in by coming over here to File, New. And I went with a 1920 by 1080 document size. And if I come over here and click Advanced Options, you can change your X and Y resolution. I've gone over this quite a few times in my tutorials over the years, but you can set this to 72 pixels per inch resolution if you want to use this only for the web, or if you plan on using this one day for print, I recommend setting this to a 300 pixels per inch resolution. And I'll keep the precision set to 32-bit floating point and my gamma set to perceptual gamma sRGB. And the fill width, I'm going to change this for now to white and go ahead and click OK. I'll hold Control and use my mouse wheel to zoom out a little bit. Next, I'm going to add guides so that it's a little bit easier to center items and just place any items within our logo design. So to do that, I'll come over here to Image, Guides, New Guide by Percent, and I'll set the horizontal here to 50 and click OK. That's going to add a horizontal logo exactly halfway across our image. And I'll do the same thing for the vertical guide, so I'll go to Image, Guides, New Guide by Percent, and I'm going to change this to vertical, and I'll click OK. So now we have our center guides here. The next thing I'll do is I'll create the main element of our logo, which is going to be that circle. So I'll come over here to my Ellipse Select tool, and I will turn on the anti-aliasing here just to make sure that our circle is nice and smooth. And I'm going to come over here to the middle of our composition, and I'm going to click and drag this. But I'm going to hold the Control key, and that's going to drag from the center, and then hold the Shift key. That's going to ensure this has a fixed aspect ratio of 1:1, or in other words, it will create a perfect circle. And I'm just going to size this until it hits 800 by 800 down here, or you can come over here and just manually set this to 800, hit the Tab key, and manually set this to 800, and this is set to pixels right here. And then just click inside of your selection area and you'll see those crosshairs there in the middle of the circle. Just drag those until they snap to the center of your guides and release. So now we have our circle here, and this is going to be the main element of our design, but we need to know what colors we're going to be using for this design. So I recommend either importing a palette, which I have a tutorial on how to do that if you have a particular palette you want to use for your brand, or if you want to come up with a brand new palette, I recommend using something called coolors.co. And here I have that website open here, so you could just type in coolors.co. It'll bring you to the Coolors homepage, and just click to use the free app, and that will take you here to where you can use the color palettes. This was the very first palette that it generated for me, so I just went ahead and used these 5 colors that it generated just to keep things simple. But as you can see here, you could just continue to hit the space bar until you get a color scheme you like, and you can lock colors along the way as you are generating different colors. So I went with this color scheme, and I just copied the HTML code here, or the hex code, and I'll just minimize this window. And I came over here to my foreground color inside of GIMP, and I just pasted that HTML notation inside here. And that will change your color to this color in here. So I'll click OK, and you can see that now my color is that dark blue color. So this will be the color I'll use for the main portion of my logo. You guys can use a different color. I'll hit Shift B to bring up my bucket fill tool. Then I'll come over here and create a new layer. And I'm just going to name this Main Circle. I'm going to keep all of my settings the same and click OK. And then I'll come over here with my bucket fill tool and click inside the selection area. And now we have our circle filled in. Next, I want to add a stroke to my logo. So I'm going to come over here to Select and go to Shrink. And I'm going to shrink this selection by 40 pixels, and you could change your units right here, and I'll click OK. And that'll shrink my selection area down. Now I want to convert the marching ants portion or the border of my selection area to a path. So to do that, I'll come over here to my paths dialog and then come down here and click this icon here, which is the selection to path icon. And I'm going to double click on this path and rename it inner circle and hit the enter key. Now I can come down here to this icon here, which is the paint along the path icon or the stroke path icon. So I'll click on that. And that'll bring up my choose stroke style dialog box here, or the stroke path dialog box. And I've already got my settings here set to what I had them before when I originally did this tutorial, but I have the anti-aliasing turned on. The line width is set to 20. If I click on my stroke style, I have my miter limit set to 5. The miter limit is going to be the feature that is going to either bevel your corners or leave your corners pointy, and that's the simplest way to put that. So basically, whenever you stroke something like letters, it's going to create points, and if the points go a little bit too high, maybe they go 20 pixels high and you want them to cut off at 5 pixels, you set the miter limit and that will just bevel those pointed corners so that they are no longer pointed. So I just have that set to 5 here. It's not going to come into play for the circular portion of this, but it will come into play a little bit later on in the tutorial. So now I'll come over here and I'm going to actually change my foreground and background color back to black and white by hitting this little icon. And then I'm going to switch the foreground color to white because I want the stroke here to be white. And now I'll come over here to the dash preset. I just had mine set to line originally. And actually before I stroke this, I want to make sure I put this on its own layer. So come over here to my layers panel, create a new layer, and I'm going to name this inner circle and click OK. And now I'll hit stroke, and that will stroke my path along that circle we created on its own layer. So I'll hit Control-Shift-A to deselect that. So now you can see we have the beginnings of our main element here, the circle portion of our logo. Next, I'm going to draw the shape elements inside of my logo, and for this particular logo, I created some mountains. That's a pretty common thing for us here in Colorado. You guys might want to use a different shape, but for that, I just came over here to my Paths tool, and I made sure I had the polygonal mode checked here. That's going to ensure that none of my paths have any curves, because these are going to be just straight lines that I create for these mountains here. And now I'm going to come down here on my composition and I'm just going to click and create random nodes here with my paths tool, and that's just allowing me to create these peaks here. And you want these to be a little bit varied. Let me hit Control Z. I want this one to be a little bit taller actually. So you want these to be pretty varied in height. That's just going to make our logo look a bit more dynamic. And I'll hold Control and zoom in. I want this point to be exactly on this guide right here. So click right there. And I can always move these nodes after the fact like so. Just make sure you come back and click on the last node that you want to draw from. So now I'll come over here and just continue creating this mountain. I'll hold Control and zoom out and just move over on my image, and I'll have this last node go way off the composition here, and then circle it back around, hold the Control key and create a union between my last node and my first node. And I can just move this mountain a little bit over here. And you guys can always make adjustments to your nodes however you want them. This looks pretty good right here, and so now I want to fill this in with a color. First, I'll create a new layer, and I'll name this Mountains, and click OK. Then I'll come over here to my foreground selection, and in this case, I'm going to go with this light blue. Again, I got this from coolers.co. You guys can copy this HTML notation or use whatever color that you generated from your color scheme. So I'll click OK. And now I'll come over here and just click the Fill Path option and choose Solid Color and click Fill. And that will fill my mountains in here on the mountains layer. Of course, these spill way off the logo and this doesn't look good. So what we need to do is just delete the excess areas, or we can mask the areas out depending on whether or not we want to be non-destructive here. In my case, I'm going to be non-destructive and go with the layer mask. So for starters, I'll come back over here to my Paths tab, and I'm going to Alt-click on the inner circle path, and that'll create a selection from that path. Now I need to shrink this because, as you can see, the selection area stops right here at the outside of my inner circle. I want it to be on the inside here. So I'll come over to Select, Shrink, and in this case I'm going to shrink this down by, I believe it's 20, and click OK. That's a bit too much, so I'll hit Control Z, Select, Shrink, and this time I'm going to go with 10. Click OK. So now you can see the selection stops right here at the inside of our inner circle, and that's what we want. So hold Control and zoom out a bit, come back over to my Layers panel, make sure I'm clicked on my mountains layer, right click here, and go to Add Layer Mask. And under Initialize Layer Mask 2, I'll choose Selection and click Add. And now that excess area there has been masked out. So there's going to be other elements that I want to erase using this inner circle selection, but of course you'll remember that the inner circle path we created is a little bit too large and I had to shrink it down by 10 pixels to get it to the right area. So now I'm just going to create a path from this circle here and save it so that it saves us some time a little bit later on. So I'll come over here to our Paths tool and I'm going to click this option, Selection of Path, and I'm going to name this Inner Circle 2. Hit the Enter key, and we'll come back to that later, but now I'll come up here. I'm going to rename this path Mountains, because this path is the drawing of our mountains. And now what I'll do is I'll come over here and duplicate this path and unhide the copy. So this is the copy of our mountains path. I'll hit Control-Shift-A to deselect that selection area I just had selected. But I have my Move tool selected right now, and I'm going to come down here and change the mode of my move to Path, because I want to move this path right here. So now I can click on this path with the Move tool, and I'll hold the Control key to drag it down in straight line mode. I'm going to drag it about right there. Now I'll come back to our Layers panel and create a new layer. And this one I'm going to name Inner Mountains and click OK. Now I'm going to grab my Paths tool, click on this path, and I want to fill this path again, but I'm going to change the color. So this time I'm going to go with this orange color. Again, you can copy the HTML notation, and I'll click OK. And now I'm going to hit Fill Path again. Solid color is selected, and I'll hit Fill. Once again, this spills outside the area we want it to. So I'll come back to my Paths dialog, and I'm going to Alt-click on the Inner Circle 2 layer. And that will select the area inside here of our inner circle. Now I'll come back over here to our Inner Mountains layer, and once again I'll right-click, go to Add Layer Mask. Under Initialize Layer Mask 2, I'll choose Selection and click Add. And I'll hit Control-Shift-A to deselect that area and grab a different tool. And actually, let me come over here to my Paths dialog and hide that path. So now you can see our mountains so far. All right, so next I'm going to add that sun element, that sun graphic that I created. And to do that, once again, I'll grab my Ellipse Select tool here, come over to the Layers panel, and I'll create a new layer. This one I'll just name Sun and hit the Enter key. And now I'm going to just click and drag, and I'm going to hold Control and the Shift key, and that's going to drag this from the center and make sure that it is a perfect circle. And I'm just going to put it about there, and I'm going to bring this down a little bit to about here. And now I want to fill this in, so I'm going to change my foreground color to this yellow color right here. Here's my HTML notation, and I'll click OK. I'll hit Shift-B to grab my bucket fill tool, and I'll just fill this in. And now we're covering up our mountain, so I'm going to click and drag this sun layer below the mountains layers. So now we have our sun shape here, the circle, and what I did in the original logo was I added a stroke to this. There are two ways we can do this. We can do that via a path, or the simpler way is going to just be to grow this selection area, which is what I'm going to do here. So I'll come over here to Select, Grow, and I'm going to grow this selection by 10 pixels this time and click OK. Now I'm going to come over and create a new layer, and I'm going to name this Sun Stroke and hit the Enter key. And then I'll just click and drag this below the sun layer. And then I'll come over here to my foreground color, and I'm just going to change this to a lighter yellow by coming over here to the green slider and just dragging this to the right a little bit. You can see that as I do that, that's making this a little bit brighter of a yellow. And maybe I'll go a little bit more, and I'll click OK. Then with my bucket fill tool still selected, I'll fill in that selection area with that lighter yellow, hit Control-Shift-A, and now we have a cool looking sun here. I also added a long shadow to this, which is easier than ever to do inside of GIMP. All you have to do is click on the layer you want to add your long shadow to, which in this case is the sunstroke layer. Then come over here to Filters, Lighten Shadow, Long Shadow, and I'll just come over here and change the style to Infinite. That'll make it go off the logo, but we'll fix that in a second. I'm going to keep the angle set to 45, and I'll keep the color as it is and click OK. So once again, we can come back over here to our Paths dialog, Alt-click on the Inner Circle 2 layer, come back to the Layers panel, right-click on this layer, go to Add Layer Mask, And under Initialize Layer Mask 2, choose Selection and click Add. And that will hide the excess long shadow. So I'll hit Control-Shift-A to deselect that area. Next, I'll add the text to my logo, and there's a few lines of text here. So I'll start by coming over here and grabbing my text tool. And for this tutorial, I'll be using the free Animosa Bold font that I downloaded. I'll include a link to that download in the description, plus I have a how-to article on how to install fonts within GIMP. But I'm going to start with the size of this font set to 200, and I'm going to change the color here to white. So just 6 Fs over here in the HTML notation, and I'll click OK. So now I'll come over here and just click inside my logo, and with my caps lock key on, I'm going to type mountain, and I'm going to make sure my text layer is above all the mountain layers here. And of course this is too big, but I'm going to select only the O through the I, and I'm going to change that to the font size 150. And if I hit the tab key, you'll see that'll change. And now I'm going to grab my move tool here and just move this into place. And actually, let me make sure my move tool is set back here to the layer mode instead of the path mode that we had it set to from earlier. So now I can move this layer, and you can see the center of this text layer will snap to the center guide. And for this portion, I'm going to hide the background layer because it's the same color as my text and it's making it hard to see. But I do want the text going a little bit off the logo here, like so. That's going to allow us to create a pretty cool effect in a second here. So I'll just go with about right here. And then I added a second line of text up top here. So grab my text tool again. This time I'm going to change the size of my text to 125 and then click inside of my logo here away from this text layer. And with my caps lock key on, I'll type west. And once again, I'll grab my move tool and just move this into place. So I'm going to move it down a little bit here. I'm going to go with about right here, and actually I'm going to move this mountain text down a little bit more. And then I had a third line of text, so I'm going to grab my text tool again. This time I'm going to change the color here, and I used a darker blue, and I'll click OK. Then I'll click inside my logo area, and let me click away from this text layer here. So I'll grab a different tool and then grab my text tool again. So I'll click somewhere inside my logo away from the mountain text, and I'll type brewery. And I'm just going to select all this text, and I'm going to resize it to 75 and hit the tab key, grab my move tool, and I'm just going to move this into place once again. And I may need to shrink this text a little bit more. So let me just grab my text tool, select all the text, and I'll go with 50 this time. And grab my move tool and move this into place, about right there. All right, so now that we have all of our text placed here, the next thing I want to do is add a stroke to the mountain text, and that's going to allow it to look like a continuation of the circular part of the logo. So to do that, I'm going to click on the mountain layer, and then I'll come over and grab my text tool, and let me just click on this text here. I'll right click and go to Path from Text. That'll convert my text into a path. So I can come over here to my Paths tool, and if I unhide this path, you can see it's in the shape of my mountain text. So I want to stroke this text, but I want to make sure that the stroke is on its own layer. So let me come over here, and I'm going to create a new layer. So I'll name this Mountain Stroke, and click OK. And I'm going to click and drag the mountain stroke layer below the mountain layer. And now what I'll do is I'll come over here to my Paths dialog, make sure I have that dark blue color as my foreground color, and then I'll come over here to the Paint Along the Path icon and click on that. And I'm going to keep my settings the same from before when we created this stroke here. And again, remember we had the line style set to the miter limit of 5. I also have my cap and join style set to these two, the first two options here. So now I'll come over here and click stroke. And if I hit Control Z and stroke this text again and maybe increase the size of the line width, you can see what that looks like. So I'll hit stroke. So now we have a lot more intense stroke happening here, and that more so emulates the area going around the outside of the circle. I kind of like that a little bit better, so I'm going to keep that. I do need to clean up the inside area of this text though, so to do that, I'm going to come over here to my Paths dialog, and I'm going to Alt-click on the original inner circle layer, so not the inner circle 2 layer, because I want this going all the way to the outside of the inner circle. And then I'll come back here to my Layers panel, make sure I'm on my Mountain Stroke layer, and right-click, go to Add Layer Mask, and under Initialize Layer Mask 2, I'll choose Selection, but I'm going to invert the mask this time because I only want to keep what's outside the selection, and I'll click Add, and that'll get rid of all the stuff in the middle here. So I'll hit Control-Shift-A to deselect that, And I'll also come back to my paths dialog and just hide that path. So we're finished with our main logo design here, and we have a few options now that we want to export this. For starters, we can crop out all the excess areas of this logo so that we don't have so much empty space. That's going to help reduce the overall file size. Also, we can export this to something like a JPEG and include a background color, and we can add whatever background color we want. Or we can export this as something like a PNG file without a background, and that's going to allow us to use this on areas where we don't need the background. So I'm going to start here by hitting Shift-C, and that's going to allow me to grab my crop tool. And I'm just going to crop out the excess areas here. And you guys can crop this with whatever aspect ratio you want and whatever size you want. In my case, I'm going to come over here and change this so that it is 1000. I'll hit the Tab key and 1000. Hit the Tab key again. And I'll just move this into place so that it is centered up here, and then I'll click to apply my crop. Now I'm going to export this logo as a PNG file so that it has a transparent background. So come over here to File, Export As, and I'll just name this West Mountain Brewery logo, and make sure this ends in .png. You can also come down here to select file type by extension and choose a variety of other files, but I'll just hit Export. I'm going to keep all the settings by default and hit export again. And there you go. All right, so that's it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, you could subscribe to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. You can visit my website at daviesmediadesign.com. You can enroll in my best-selling GIMP 2.10 photo editing masterclass on Udemy, and you can enroll in any of my Skillshare classes by visiting gimpschool.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.